Good afternoon, everyone. We're really glad to have you here with us today on NLIHC's HoUSed campaign for long-term solutions call. We have a couple of guests with you here to talk about urgent and emerging issues today. My name is David Gonzalez-Rice. I'm Senior Vice President for Policy here at the National Low Income Housing Coalition. And I'm actually going to turn the floor right over to our first guest, Steve Berg from NAEH. If you've been joining these calls, you'll have seen him many times. He's their longtime point for policy over at National Alliance to End Homelessness. So Steve, without further ado, we'll go right to you. Thank you.
Thanks, David, and hi, everybody. Hope everybody's having a good start to your week. So I'm going to talk about the Continuum of Care program and the Notice of Funding Opportunity for fiscal 25 funding. If people aren't familiar with that program, it's about a $4 billion program at HUD that funds homeless programs in local communities, mostly a series of grants that go either to state or local government or to nonprofit organizations within the community to provide housing, provide short-term assistance for people who are homeless, and then to provide services to help people who are homeless get back into housing. Usually the notice of funding opportunity for fiscal year 25 funding would have been out already. There is some indication, including an article in Politico, a sourced article in Politico, that indicates that HUD is going to, when it puts this NOFO out, is going to try to make big changes to this program. The biggest change it's going to make, if it comes out the way the Politico article said, is that it will limit the amount of money that communities can use for permanent housing to 30% of their funding. Right now, overall nationwide, 87% of the program goes to permanent housing. Basically all of it for people with disabilities who have been homeless and now have escaped homelessness and gotten into housing. It's 80% nationwide. Some communities, many communities, it's more like 100%. And what this 30% cap requirement would do is tell communities that they have to defund a lot of that housing. And that means people who are in that housing who used to be homeless but aren't homeless anymore and were told that that was permanent housing would lose their housing subsidies, and many of them, we fear, would end up back in the street. In fact, the Politico article and our calculations indicates more than 170,000 people, 170,000 people around the country would lose their permanent housing subsidies, including older adults, people with disabilities, veterans, families with children. Nearly every continuum of care in the country would be impacted by that. And from what we've heard from other places, like right now, this threat to the Continuum of Care program could be the biggest threat to existing help with housing for people with the lowest incomes in the country. Just to explain a little bit more about how this came about, the Continuum of Care program for many years has come out once a year. They come out with this new notice of funding opportunity, and communities have to apply. Largely, the program just funds existing programs for another year, but then there's a certain amount of it is competitively funded and a certain amount of new projects are, if Congress puts enough money into the program, there can be new projects every year. A couple years ago, Congress decided that rather than doing a new competition every year, it would be an every 2-year notice of funding opportunity. Because it was a lot of work for everybody, including at the program level. And Congress thought it would be good if the grants would be for 2 years so that they could actually implement the grants rather than spending all their time doing a new application every year. The way that was written in Congress, it was up to HUD whether they want to do it that way. HUD early in 2024 said, well, we are going to take advantage of that, told communities this is going to be a 2-year NOFO process. And whatever you apply for fiscal 24, we'll just with a couple of exceptions, we'll just renew that for fiscal 25. So communities all over the country sort of planned their whole process for that to be the case. And we're very much looking forward to a year of implementing existing programs rather than doing a whole new application every year. Then in 2025, in early 2025, HUD came out with a new sort of informal announcement to communities that know they were going to require a whole new application for fiscal 25 funding. They were not going to do a second year of the fiscal 24 NOFO. They were going to require a whole new application. This means a lot of problems for a lot of communities who had not set aside the time to do that and spent the time figuring out how they would use the second year of the 2-year NOFO. And then other indications from HUD indicated they were considering these big changes. And the Politico article came out just sort of confirmed the worst of our thoughts, which is that a lot of the permanent housing would be defunded. And so we have been talking to Congress a lot about this problem and have gotten very good response from many people in Congress. Democrats particularly, I think the Rosa DeLauro and Patty Murray bills about homelessness both included that this should be a second year of a 2-year NOFO, that the 25 funds should just do automatic renewals for the 24 funding. And so we have worked very hard to get Congress to go along with that. Many people in Congress have expressed a lot of concern about what HUD is planning and have gotten on board with the idea of just renewing the previous year's funding. And so we're hoping that we can get a lot of help with this and really get a lot of people behind it. We've got state and local decision makers. We're talking to landlords, developers, all these groups besides just the usual homeless advocates are hopefully getting on board with this. And so let me stop there and open it up for any questions people might have about that.
Folks, I'll invite you to come off mute or raise your hand if you'd like. Steve, we do have a couple questions that have come through the chat already. One was about whether that category of permanent housing includes rapid rehousing as well as what we typically think of as PSH.
Yes, it does. It includes both from what the Politico article said. Both of the 30% limit would apply to both of those total.
So an even kind of starker stake there, if we're counting both of those program types. And I've mentioned to some folks that that would include the DV bonus rapid rehousing. If your community has YHDP rapid rehousing, it's not just permanent supportive housing that's at risk
Right.
in this process. Steve, we also got a question about how recent court decisions on HUD's restrictions on funding. We saw some reporting about the Rhode Island case recently. How, if at all, that impacts this NOFO process that we expect.
Yeah, there's none of the court decisions that directly affect this. Um, in general, I think it shows a fair amount of skepticism towards some of these moves by HUD to go back on contracts they've already signed or commitments they've already made. Um, it's also very clear that if HUD proceeded with the full NOFO process, it's already way too late and to do that and get the money out before the previous year's funding runs out. So that I think the courts have been concerned about uh, overall disruption to these systems, and this would, besides just the elimination of so much permanent housing, it was also disrupt the rest of the system in a pretty severe way.
Absolutely. We have a question about 30 days to respond to a NOFO. Is there a point at which it would be too late for HUD to release the NOFO, i.e., the 30-day response time would fall after some grants are meant to start in 2026?
Well, I think we are already at the point where uh, it's too late with the shutdown, since that appears to, they're not going to open up the government today. So uh, we're already at a point where they won't be able to get funding out before the previous year's grants expire in the communities where they expire the earliest. So that timing issue is a major problem with this approach, and that's why we're working so hard with Congress to get them to just renew the existing grants, because that would be a much more streamlined process.
And then Eric has mentioned in the chat that Politico reported HUD had not had its NOFO reviewed by its own lawyers. So whatever happens with an injunction isn't necessarily much of a bellwether for what the administration will do. Um, Steve, there are a few other questions, such as could HUD even issue a NOFO during this government shutdown? Also, a question about a support letter some senators have signed on to that NIH was reporting this morning, and if there was any update there on the senators who've come forward.
Yeah. So the first question, I mean, we think it's highly unlikely that they'll be able to put a NOFO out during the shutdown. I mean, some agencies put a bunch of NOFOs in grants.gov just like the day before the shutdown, but this one did not get out before the shutdown started. So we think it's unlikely that they'll be able to put it out. I want to say if they followed the law, they wouldn't be able to, but that
Right.
is not the end of the story.
Always
Um,
gotta have an asterisk on that. Yeah.
yeah, and the other question is, yes, there is a very good letter that some members of Congress have put out about this, that we would encourage anyone to take a look at that. And if you're inclined, see if you can get your members of Congress to sign on.
Absolutely. Let's see. Status of HMIS and coordinated entry within what's reported by Politico. And I do want to clarify for folks that we haven't seen the actual NOFO, so we're reading between the lines of what we've seen in other announcements and actions by HUD and this reporting.
Yeah, I can't really speak to that. We don't have enough detail to really be able to say anything
That's
about that.
right. I mean, they're not classified as permanent housing, so but it's hard to know what other kinds of conditions they might put in
But
place. Um, a question about joint components. The joint component TH and rapid rehousing. Again, I don't know whether we have enough detail there, Steve, to
yeah, I don't expect any change in that, but that's not something that other things coming from HUD have indicated any desire to get rid of, but who knows?
And then a question here about what the funding is meant to be repurposed to. And I think you mentioned this. The reporting is that transitional housing and other kinds of shorter term assistance would be favored in the new NOFO.
Well, and again, we're not sure of any of that. There may be there's been some indication from other things HUD has said that they would indicate that. All we know is that it can't be permanent housing. You can't use more than 30% for permanent housing. Um, and the rest of it would be competitive, and it depends on what the eligible activities are.
All right. Thanks. So much interest in this topic. The questions keep coming into the chat. Steve, I wonder if if you're able to see our Q&A and think about some of these questions that you could answer live or type an answer to while we turn quickly to our next guest on the next topic. I'd appreciate it.
Sure, I'll get in there and we'll if you send us the questions afterwards, I can get some people around
And
here who
also get you some answers in
know
writing.
more of the
Fantastic.
details of the program. Thanks a lot for having me.
Thanks for joining us, Steve. I'll just underscore that, what's at stake with so many folks being at risk of having housing assistance ended at this time. Of course, we want to maintain the integrity of the COC program. And this request for HUD to abide by its promise to use the every 2 year competition instead of the annual competition, at the very least, buys communities and advocates time so that we aren't facing this dramatic change immediately. So thanks to all of you for your support in advocating there. Next, I'm happy to introduce Paul Osadebe, who is a steward at AFGE 476 and an organizer with the Federal Unionist Network. He's already made himself known in the chat, mentioned having been one of the attorneys that was not asked to review the COC NOFO. Paul, you may know, has been interviewed in press outfits a lot lately for having submitted whistleblower statements to Senator Warren and calling out actions at HUD that are concerning and undermining fair housing enforcement. So, Paul, if you're available, we're really glad to have you here now, and I'll hand it over to you.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me. And I'm so glad that a call like this can come together to talk about all the really serious issues we're facing in housing, making sure that everyone in this country has shelter and equal access to the type of housing that they need to thrive. Um, so like he said, I'm Paul Osadebe. I'm a trial attorney in the Office of Fair Housing at the Department of Housing, in the headquarters office. And I'm a steward with AFGE 476, which is the union for the headquarters office, and an organizer with the Federal Unionist Network, which is a network of federal workers and union members that are organizing to save our agencies from the type of attacks that we're seeing at HUD and at civil rights agencies all across the country, and really just any agency that tries to protect the rights and provide for the needs of working people all across the country. So I'm going to talk a little bit about what we do at the Office of Fair Housing, what is happening there and at FHEO, and what happened with the whistleblower report and what we can potentially do to respond. So, like I said, I'm in the Office of Fair Housing, which is the legal office in the General Counsel. And basically, what we do is enforce the Fair Housing Act and other civil rights laws. And we make sure that the government itself and people that receive funds from the government all comply with civil rights laws. But that's actually not the limit of what we're supposed to do. What the law says and what the agency does when we're working to our fullest extent is going beyond just preventing discrimination. We're supposed to be actively making the country fairer. We're supposed to be actively providing more equal access to housing and making sure that the country is more integrated and more just when it comes to housing. And the Office of Fair Housing does that in a bunch of different ways. We, of course, prosecute cases of discrimination that the public brings to us. And the secretary can also initiate investigations and bring complaints on their own. We help our client office, the Office of Fair Housing and Equal Opportunity, which is the investigators. They're the cops that go out there and investigate allegations of housing discrimination and make sure that we have what we need to actually prosecute those cases. And unfortunately, you might have seen over the last few days, a huge number of them got mass layoff notices after their offices were already decimated over the last several months due to firings and due to people being forced to resign because the atmosphere is just impossible to work in. Our office also drafts regulations. We advise program offices and Fair Housing Equal Opportunity on what the law says when it comes to civil rights, what their obligations are, and how they can both avoid discriminating themselves and how they can advance civil rights in housing all across the country. We advise Congress on laws that might impact civil rights, and we help settle cases as well. So we are supposed to be in the room with the investigators, who are the ones who directly interact with the people that bring complaints and the people accused of discrimination. So the landlords, the banks, the states, developers, all of that, we're supposed to be in the room, and we essentially advocate for the public and for the person that alleged discrimination. And we warn the person who was accused of discrimination, the bank or whatever, about what issues that we see in the case, what potential risk they're facing, and we're supposed to help make sure that cases are settled in a way that gets things resolved quickly and make sure that people get immediate help when something can be solved quickly, so that people immediately get the housing they need, the extra rental charges that they're facing are taken away, or the eviction is blocked. That's the stuff that we're supposed to do. We're supposed to charge cases, and we're supposed to refer cases to the Department of Justice, so we're supposed to work with them. Everything I just described is the work that we're not really being allowed to do under this administration from day one. There were 4 of us who filed a whistleblower complaint outlining the legal violations of what HUD was already doing to violate the law and the ways that they were interfering with our work in the ways that made it impossible for us to enforce the law and comply with civil rights obligations. So it goes all the way from the investigatory stage, putting limits on the types of cases that we can investigate. So guidance that's saying that we can't investigate cases involving sexual orientation or gender identity or assistance animals, all types of cases. We saw them actually pull back cases that we'd already investigated and determined that discrimination probably happened there, or there was at least reasonable cause to think that discrimination happened. When that happens, we are legally required to bring that case. And we're the only way that people can get a case like that brought for free with the power of the federal government behind it, without asking about your income, without asking about any of that. It's just, do you need help? Did we find that discrimination happened? We're supposed to help and charge that case. Instead, they were deciding based on political reasons, non-lawyers, political appointees were deciding that we just don't like certain types of cases. So they were illegally pulling back those cases from the Department of Justice. They were illegally preventing us from talking to the Department of Justice, because they had a gag order saying that we couldn't talk to any external parties. And they were so unclear that we had to interpret external parties to include the people bringing complaints. So imagine that you can't talk to your own advocate, your own lawyer in a case. How are you supposed to effectively defend your rights? And how is that lawyer supposed to defend your rights? It's not possible, and it made it impossible to actually enforce the law. They were stopping us from getting involved with settlements, as I said, but they were also going back in time and for the same political reasons, deciding that they were going to cancel the enforcement of settlements that had already been agreed to by the person who allegedly discriminated and the person who faced discrimination. HUD would come in sometimes years after the fact and say, we're just not enforcing that. We're going to cancel that. That violates the rights of the people who actually were parties to the discrimination, and it caused all types of problems. And it's not just the enforcement, it's also the compliance aspects. Like I said in the chat, they completely cut us out of the process of making sure that HUD itself was not violating civil rights laws through how it gave out money for building housing or supporting existing housing, for disaster recovery, for all the things that HUD funds all across the country were so integral to the way that housing operates in this country. And HUD has a central role of making sure that we're actively making housing more fair and more obtainable to every single person in this country, regardless of race, gender, disability, having kids, any of that. That's what we're supposed to do. And we were just not being allowed to make sure that we were doing that. That included to the point of them searching through the LinkedIn profiles of organizations like maybe some of yours out there that actually provide housing to people or that protect people's housing civil rights. And they were searching for DEI terms, including terms that are in civil rights laws, such as race or affirmative or disabled, like basic core concepts of civil rights enforcement and compliance. They were labeling that as DEI and using that as a reason to cancel the contracts. And I think we talked a little bit about the Rhode Island cases, the cases where FIPS, the organizations that are supposed to, or yeah, the organizations that are supposed to enforce civil rights laws privately or educate people about civil rights, we're supposed to review the notices of funding that provide the opportunity for people to apply to those and to make sure that those funding requirements advance civil rights or at least don't discriminate. We were cut out of the process for reviewing that as well. There's just so many different elements. For example, VAWA. I was on the team that worked on the Violence Against Women Act, which protects people in federally funded housing, many different types of federal housing, from being discriminated against for being a survivor of domestic violence, suffering sexual assault or stalking or other types of VAWA abuse. We're supposed to make sure that people get the emergency transfers that they need. People in urgent life or death situations who are on the street, we're supposed to make sure that they get that housing, and that we hold the people that we are funding and that are supposed to be serving the American people, we're supposed to hold them accountable. But they shredded the investigator team that actually works on that, that makes sure that people are trained and know how to actually serve complainants in trauma-informed ways, who know how to actually deal with all the pitfalls of domestic violence cases and VAWA cases in general. That team was destroyed. And then the team that was the few people who were trained up, the attorneys to work on those types of cases, they were also slated to be reassigned. Some of the supervisors were fired or have already been reassigned. And then people like me were supposed to be reassigned to work defending the agency instead of protecting your rights. So it was a dire situation at HUD. And because of that, we felt the need to blow the whistle, to tell people what's happening to their rights under this administration's watch. Those rights, the ability to actually enforce the law, to have the federal government put a thumb on the scale in favor of civil rights, in favor of equal housing, no matter who you are, that is being eliminated as we speak. So we felt the need to say something about that and to be as public about it and bring as many people into the fight as possible, because we're all affected by this. As Americans, we're all supposed to be protected by these civil rights laws and VAWA and all of these laws. We're all supposed to have equal access to housing. And many of the groups that are on this call are funded, at least in part, by HUD. We're supposed to make sure that the requirements for that actually facilitate the growth of your organizations and making sure that you can do your jobs. Meanwhile, all of that was being blocked, dismantled. We were being retaliated against for doing that work, and they were trying to move us away from that work. So we talked to Congress, we talked to the media, we talked to many different organizations who are also committed to civil rights, and we tried to get people going on that. Unfortunately, two of us that were public, myself and Palmer Heenan, who's also in my same office, were retaliated against for whistleblowing. They outright fired Palmer, and they recommended me to be removed from my position protecting civil rights. But as evidenced by the fact that I'm talking to you right now, I don't intend to stay silent. I don't intend to talk about this any less. In fact, I want to organize more with you and with everyone who cares about housing and who cares about civil rights, and to actually expand what we talk about. Because it's not just enforcement, it's not just the things that I've already talked about. They're trying to weaponize HUD. They're trying to weaponize federal funding all across the country, not just at the federal level, but down to the state level, the county level, the city level. We're seeing attempts to actually restrict states from having more civil rights than the federal government does. They're saying that if you do that, you're not compliant with HUD anymore, and we're going to cut your funding or restrict your funding. We're seeing grantees that engage in anything that they could spin as DEI work, as if there's anything wrong with diversity, equity, or inclusion. I just want to make sure to say that there's nothing wrong with DEI. DEI is a great thing. But they're saying that anything that's DEI, we're going to cut that. And if you're an organization that's involved in that, we're going to cut your funding. There's just so many different things. There are attempts to build homeless shelters or efforts to help unhoused people through building in local communities. We're already seeing that they're planning to restrict the ability to work on that. Disaster recovery. I'm from Houston. I was working at a legal aid place during Hurricane Harvey, when the other legal aid was not available, it was so important to have HUD be available to rebuild after Hurricane Harvey, to make sure that local communities were more resilient and were more able to withstand huge disasters like that. And what HUD is gearing up to do is to not be available for those people who need that relief, that forward-looking funding to rebuild and to come back stronger from natural disasters. That's a civil rights issue, that's a housing issue, that's a justice issue. And because of that, they're trying to cut that as well. So we all have a huge stake in this fight. And it's very important to recognize that there are more of us than there are of them. And we do have power when we work collectively to actually respond to these threats. So as Iris was putting in the chat, there's members of Congress that are responsible for making sure that whistleblowers are not retaliated against, that civil rights laws are enforced, that housing is provided, no matter what, all across the country. That is the law right now, and it's their job to make sure that that's enforced. So Tim Scott, French Hill, all the people on the various housing committees in both the House and the Senate, they should be getting calls from every single member of all of your organizations, from you individually, and we should be demanding that that housing laws are fully enforced, that staffing is maintained so that the rights can actually be a real thing and not just something on paper, because that's what they're trying to take us to technically have an Office of Fair Housing and an Office of Fair Housing and Equal Opportunity. But when someone calls to get help, there will be no one to pick up the phone and no one to actually help them. That's what we're heading towards if we're not already there. So it's important for us to call, but not just call, show up to their offices. Don't let them hide from what they're doing, because that's the strategy so far, to just try to dodge responsibility and to not acknowledge what you're actually doing to local communities and to individuals. Making sure that when there's rallies, like including a potential future rally at HUD headquarters, make sure to be there. Make sure to make your voice loud and clear so that it can't be hidden what's happening right now. And there's many different ways to get involved. I'm planning, and my coworkers and all the other people are planning to continue to partner with every single person on this call and everyone who cares about housing to fight back against these attacks. And I think when we do that and use every single tool at our disposal, I think the people who care about housing will win over the people who don't seem to care what they're doing to people. If anyone has questions or wants to figure out ways that they can get involved, talk to Iris in the chat, ask me a question now. And we all have to work together and fight back in this moment. And I think if we do that, then we can win.
Paul, thank you so much. The chat is blowing up with expressions of appreciation for your service and for your and your colleagues' courage in raising these issues. There were a lot of questions about how to get involved, how to reach you. Iris did drop some information in the chat about ways to take action. NLIHC has a take action link as well that my staff has shared in the chat. So if there's one place that you would direct them, your Iris would point them to where they can either take action or get in touch with you to collaborate on maybe bringing you to where they are.
Got on mute. So there's a couple different ways. So you can contact me directly. I'll put my name, my email in the chat, and you can also contact Iris. I'm assuming, I don't want to speak for Iris, but I'm assuming Iris will be happy to talk to you. You can also get in contact with the Federal Unionist Network. We're current and former federal employees that are trying to organize in this moment and connect beyond the typical ways that federal workers usually fight back. It can't just be lawsuits. it has to be organizing with people like you. So, okay, she put it in the chat. Actually, can you send that to everyone? I think it's just to hosts and panelists right now. But you can contact. Actually, just contact us. We're. I'll put you in touch with whoever you need to be in touch with.
And my
And
colleagues on
go
the
from there.
field team who are helping us host this call let me know that they'll be following up for this call. So if you're here now or you registered RSVP, you'll get in the follow-up some links and resources on how to connect and how to follow up. Paul, there's one question here I hope you'll answer live, and then
Mhm.
your team and ours can keep answering some of these questions in writing. Someone asked, how can other former employees contribute to the whistleblower complaints or help now if they're not currently employed but are former?
Yeah, we absolutely want to hear from former employees. You might have more freedom and face less retaliation than people who are currently there. So we're continuing to coordinate with Senator Warren's office, with Representative Waters, and hopefully increasingly more and more members of Congress. So I think interfacing with Senator Warren's office is a good way to do that right now. And you can remain anonymous. You can be public, whichever way works better for you. You can join with the Federal Unionist Network because we try to organize former feds as well, and they're really important to this movement as well because almost all the former feds should not be former. You were illegally fired or forced out, so you can continue to fight right now. And we're working on kind of a method for whistleblowing that's kind of based on what we've done at HUD and what other people have done, whether whistleblowing or not, just how to organize the community and how to leverage all your connections as someone who serves the public to actually amplify what's happening and to make enough noise to stop what's happening. So if you want to learn about that, join the fun and we can go from there.
Fantastic. Thank you, Paul, so much for a very informative and energizing presentation. A really enthusiastic reception from the audience on the call. I'm sure you'll be hearing from a lot of folks who are interested in pitching in. And again, if you're able to stay on and work through some of those questions as we go. Oh, what does AFGE
One,
stand for before you go?
oh, American Federation of Government Employees. It's the
Great.
union that I'm part of.
Great.
Oh, one important thing. Iris just pointed this out in the chat. As attorneys, we have a lot of things we can do, but we are somewhat limited in our ability to tell individual stories of what's happening to individual clients and people who come to us with complaints. But you as individuals and you as organizations, you can do that. You can write local op-eds in your community and make sure that French Hill and Tim Scott are getting asked questions about John Smith, who was kicked out of his housing because he couldn't get into the door physically because the door was too small. What are you going to do about that? Why are you cutting the staff that would help that person? You can go do office visits about that and tell individual stories. Bring those people with you so that, again, they can't hide from what's happening. That's where you can really amplify and make it impossible to dodge what's going on. So any way that you can do that, and if you want to coordinate with us to figure out ways to do that, we're happy to talk about that.
That's a really excellent point. I'm glad you pointed that out, Paul. We all have different latitudes, different positions, and are able to contribute in different ways. I'm going to give a very brief policy update that in some ways builds on what Paul just shared. So often on these calls, the policy team just gives a kind of a landscape and what's current. We all know that we're in this long dragging government shutdown without a clear exit route in sight. What I want to point out that Paul just gave us all the story behind the story of the reductions in force, right? That before the shutdown, before this most recent round of rifts, The current administration has been stopping work and reducing government capacity in a number of ways. The Office of Fair Housing and Equal Opportunity at HUD has been particularly hard hit by staff reductions as well as restrictions on work. And in this moment of the shutdown, the administration has announced another round of reductions in force. They've affected a lot of agencies. At HUD, it's on the order of another 400 plus positions slated for elimination, with the Office of Fair Housing getting hit hard again. Other offices that were targeted include the Office of Housing Counseling, which works with folks who are considering buying a house, considering taking on a mortgage, or who may be at foreclosure risk, helping people get on a payment plan that reduces their risk of being put out of their homes. We also had really significant cuts to the office within the Division of Public and Indian Housing at HUD that oversees inspections in the public housing, housing choice voucher, and multifamily housing programs. So a lot of the portfolio of HUD assisted housing, where staff who oversaw those inspections and the quality of those inspections have received reductions in force. So the point I just want to make is that the pattern with these RIF notices is to uh, reduce the government's capacity to oversee programs and to learn about how they're going, right? To hear from the public complaints that are elevated and issues that need to be addressed. So the whole feedback loop in a lot of different government programs is being compromised in what looks from the outside like a very deliberate way. So that's something that here at National Low Income Housing Coalition, we're trying to shine a light on in our advocacy, and just want to encourage y'all to think about that. Someone asked in the chat about what various member offices might be thinking. I don't have an answer to that, but I want to offer one really stark example that some of the recent positive movement in the Senate, including the Road to Housing Act, as well as some recent legislative language on CDFIs. Uh, um, I'm going to get my acronym spelled out wrong here, so someone hopefully will help me in the chat. But CDFIs that contribute to local development in underserved areas, economic development in underserved areas, have long enjoyed strong bipartisan support. And Senate Republicans with Democrats had just put out statements celebrating shared language around CDFIs that went with Road to Housing in the National Defense Authorization Act, when the very next day, if not the entire office, nearly the entire staff who run CDFIs at the Department of Treasury received RIFs, reductions in force. So it would be my question as well to your members of Congress, where they are celebrating bipartisan momentum or wins, only to find that the state capacity, the government capacity that would be necessary to see that through, is being undermined by the current administration and by OMB. It's hard to see a lot of potential in those policy wins, even when we're getting them, where senators are able to come together to agree. So I will leave it there. I'm happy to follow up with folks who would like to talk about that more or ask questions in the chat. And then Romina Davidson, our VP for Field and Innovation, has some comments and updates for you all. Thank you.
Thanks so much, David, and Paul and Steve, for talking through a little bit about what folks are doing and sharing such important information with people. Paul, I really just want to thank you so much for the discussion on organizing and fair housing. Organizing seems to be the theme of this call, which I love as a longtime organizer. And I really kind of want to take this opportunity to use this call to think a little bit about continuing to strategize for action as a group. Brooke, can you go ahead and advance the slide? Thank you so much. So as a field team and as working with other folks across the country, both on the state and local level, as well as other kinds of national organizations, connecting with folks like the National Alliance and other organizers as well, we've been getting kind of into a lot of discussion about where can folks do a lot of collaboration and learning, discuss bright spots, whether it comes to advocacy with certain members of Congress or with each other, and how to actually do this long-term or short-term planning and strategy. We are currently in this shutdown as it is right now, and we are kind of locked in for the next year or so with this administration and other kinds of things that seem to keep coming up. And so we'd like to, we've been getting some requests to kind of create spaces for more collaboration and discussion among folks who are on the ground at the state and local level, as well as those of us who work kind of on the national level as well. And so as we are kind of doing this work here, I'd like to kind of just open it up to folks to see if these kinds of tables would be interesting for you all. Would you like to be a part of these kinds of like planning and collaboration sessions among each other and with us? Are there kinds of issues that you would like us to discuss? We've had certain kinds of folks ask us to connect with others in their state and region. Like we can set tables for that, or to strategize in similar political environments, whether federally or on the state and local level. We know you all don't actually like have the same kinds of relationships, right, with your representatives. Some folks, as Paul was saying, are really kind of looking to discuss that kind of how do we plan ahead for some of this work. We're here kind of to stay. So what do we do to get ahead? If certain things happen, how can we work together to ensure people can stay housed and safe? And then we're also thinking a little bit about how to connect tenants to each other in terms of either grassroots movements or other kinds of ways. The National Low Income Housing Coalition has tenant talk and other opportunities, but we want to make sure that folks are able to kind of connect with each other. So we are kind of deep in that strategizing process of how do we set these tables with us and also connect you with other national organizations like the Alliance and with Paul. And so for folks who are interested, please just tell us in the chat as you have been, and we're going to go ahead and follow up with you outside of this call to see what exactly you'd like to see. And for the folks who are saying in the chat, regional tables, thank you so much, Kyle. If you've got ideas, please feel free to actually come off mute or put in the chat, what would you like to see from us? What tables can we set for you? Or how would you like us to connect you with each other or to other folks? I see some around AI. That's great. Some regional or state tables for red states. I love that, Michelle. Thank you so much. COC connections. Beautiful. How homeless response systems can best practice in the face of bad policy. Love that. Okay. I love this. Encampment policies and clearings. Yes, we know the folks at the Law Center are doing a lot around that too. We'd be happy to connect you with whatever makes sense. Connecting with regional folks. Hey, Tyler, good to see you. More for regional connections. Okay. Tables about reasonable accommodations for unhoused and disabled people to access housing. Yes. Deanna, thank you. More on the regional connections. Folks are really loving the regional connections. How to explain things to grassroots partners. There's complicated interplay. Thank you, Heather. Yes. Oh, beautiful. A connection with the Great Panthers. Wow. I'm loving seeing this in the chat. Does anybody want to also come off mute? As lovely it is to hear me reading from the chat. Advocating at the state level. Or maybe folks can't come off mute. Oh, my bad. Sorry, everybody. Then I'll just continue to read. Okay. Ways to engage landlords. Beautiful. I'm going to leave this open for a little while longer so folks can continue writing. More research on HUD language, where there is a much higher threshold for permanent supportive housing than what is being leaked at Politico. Has anyone from National Income Housing Coalition connected with the National Poor People's Campaign? Yes, over time we have connected in various kinds of iterations, as well as other movements, Heather. ACL has some housing toolkits and resources for people with disabilities. Thank you, Gloria. Any other ideas from folks? Discrimination and tenant organizing, yes. Democrat electeds are only just aware of tenants as multi-generational, multiracial constituents. Wonderful, thank you, Betsy. Engaging community stakeholders during the challenging environment, yes. I am very connected to Paul Bowden, Courtney, yes. Providing support groups for housing advocates who may be retaliated against for doing this work. Tanya, that's really important. Thank you for putting that in the chat. Yes. That increase literacy around housing issues, including legal literacy. Yes. Thank you, Deanna. Okay. So as folks kind of continue in this chat, we'll be saving this chat and collecting information. It sounds like to me that folks are interested in us to help connect you or set tables if gaps exist. So we're going to go ahead and start strategizing a little bit on this end about how we can do that in the best way with you in order to kind of start pushing these things forward because we really cannot do this work without you. As Paul had mentioned, we are much stronger together in terms of how we are able to advance housing justice in this kind of political environment. So I'm just going to go ahead and run out the time. David, is that okay? So that we can continue to kind of get stuff from folks?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. Thank you. So I do think this is important. And Brooke, thank you for advancing the slide. We do have a few ways for folks to get involved. So we do have a call to action about letting members of Congress know how you are impacted by the shutdown. Please, if you're interested in supporting National Income Housing Coalition's work or being more involved in conversations like ones we are talking about, consider becoming a member with us. And after this call and for all time, if you are interested in getting more involved in our work, please contact a member of your field team. Hi, Karen. So nice to see you in the chat. So many friends I have on this call. And we can provide those links to you in the chat as well, because I know you can't click through the screen. So if y'all can help me put those in the chat, that would be fabulous. And Betsy, we will absolutely continue to keep providing you information. Our policy team will keep doing that, among other things. Okay. Thank you all. This is super, super helpful to me. We have 1 minute left. David, do you want to close out and just say what you need to say?
Thank you very much, everyone. Excuse me. We're all encouraged by your enthusiasm and how you're all showing up and expressing your support for our guest speakers, for the causes they're speaking on behalf of, and your interest and energy in connecting. So we'll be very, very happy to reach back out and identify next steps together with you. Take care.